Welcome back. Looks like we got a pretty good crowd here. Our second panel is going to be capability integration, fitting it all in. We're going to be moderated by, I was told, Infantry Lieutenant General Pat Donahue. Pat, welcome. Obviously, the reason that we all exist here in aviation, right? He is now Vice President for Army and Special Operations Forces Programs at Lockheed Martin Government Affairs. He joined Lockheed Martin in August 2017, and he was, DCG Forces Command at now Fort Liberty in North Carolina. He's commanded every echelon. So with that, Pat, take it away.
Well, thank you very much. That was more. I think the maybe unique thing about this panel is that there are two former maneuver commanders on it. We are great consumers of all things aviation, lift, reconnaissance, and attack. And thanks to I've served with many of these aviators in this room where we did great things on the battlefield. And so I know what aviation does for the Combined Arms team, and I'm a big fan of this particular panel, which is about integrating that capability with the rest of the Combined Arms and Joint Force. So we're going to, what I'm going to ask the panelists to quickly introduce each themselves and to give a quick discussion about what they want to get out of today's panel, what they want you to get out of today's panel, and then we'll go to questions. With that, I'll go to General Francis.
Okay, thanks, Pat. And you said you had two maneuver commanders on this panel. I would say you had four.
I meant to say touche.
Okay,
that's payback, Dave.
Just to set it.
Ground maneuver.
Set it state.
Ground maneuver commander is what I meant to say.
Okay, well, hey, it is great to be back. I did a sojourn over to AFRICOM, spent 2 years in a combatant command, and got to be the customer of what everybody in this room strives to produce. And I will tell you, the three things I really learned from that experience is, number one, is that all fights are global now. So very rarely are you going to find a situation where an incident, a crisis, or some sort of event happens in the military sphere that doesn't involve multiple combatant commands and multiple functional component commands as well. Second, that all fights are global, and there are elements to whatever's happening in Indo-PACOM that affect all the other combatant commands at the same time. And third is that the demand from the combatant commands will continue to be insatiable. And so all the capabilities we're talking about here today, I will tell you, every combatant commander out there would employ them today if they had them in their hands. And so it's up to this enterprise to help to produce those things, to do the .mil PF integration, to bring them to not just a piece of kit, but a capability, as was discussed earlier, to provide for that Joint Force commander. That's really what we're all about, is our ground force commanders and our Joint Force commanders out there and the fights that we're getting ready to prosecute. And just one thing, is our Netherlands LNO still in here? Okay. Hey, you brought up a question I just wanted to add one point to about protection, right? About the vulnerabilities of aircraft. And you were, I think, speaking in terms of what kind of kit are we going to put on aircraft in terms of aircraft survivability equipment. But the one aspect we didn't really talk about was the fact that the way we fight, as was mentioned by General Mingus earlier, is inherent to our protection and our vulnerabilities as well. And that is as a combined arms team, because there isn't any aspect of our military, tanks, infantrymen, artillery, FARPs, aircraft, that aren't vulnerable in some way, shape, or form. But when we fight as a combined arms team, that is a huge aspect of which gives us force protection out there. So thank you, everybody, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
That sounded good. Hey, everybody, McCurry here. Unlike General Francis, I didn't leave until just recently, this enterprise. So about 3 weeks in the job now down in Austin as the Chief of Staff of Army Futures Command, and I was proud to serve as the 17th Branch Chief. First, sir, congrats to you on the confirmation and the new job at TRADOC. Well deserved, and really honored to be up here alongside you today. Also, congrats to General Gill and the rest of the six-pack here. I know you all are going to fix everything that we left you because, you know, after serving in as leading part of the enterprise since I first got to Damo AV 12 years ago, you know, General Francis and I probably had our hands in anything that's wrong with aviation today. So it's fitting we're up here to answer those questions. I'm proud to be back here and focusing on transformation of the total Army force again. And I'm thank you for your time. I think it's an exciting time for the Army and Army aviation, rapidly evolving technology, you know, relatively constrained budgetary environment in a really dangerous world. So that means we all have to be really good at what we do. And, you know, the focus is integration and fitting it all in. I think that that word integration means different things to different people. It could mean, you know, dot mil PFP if you're in TRADOC and parts of AFC. It could mean how do you build the budget if you're a programmer? But what I really like to focus on is how do you integrate everything on the field of battle so that we uphold the sacred trust? Thanks.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Jim Pasquarette. I currently work for General Dynamics Land Systems, and we make the Abrams, Stryker, Booker, Sergeant Stout, formerly MSHORAD, something called SMET, Small Multi-Purpose Equipment Transport, none of them that fly. So I am a little bit of an outlier here today, but I do see a lot of familiar, friendly faces from former lives, mentors, some of you in the room here, looking over to General Thurman in particular. Just a couple thoughts to kick this off is, and I'll go to General Thurman as my boss. My one experience in combat were a lot of aviation or things that flow worked for me for the first time, really, was as an ABCT commander working for my boss over there. We deployed together at the same time. I was just north of Baghdad, but I had the Raven out there flying around at the very low tactical level. Shadow, which I heard, you know, I know it's going away now, and that made a difference for us in that environment where a Shadow could survive in a counterinsurgency. It's not the answer today, what we're looking at. But a couple of, and for the first time ever, I didn't do it at NTC, I didn't do it at Fort Hood. I was doing air insertions of infantry guys out there because you didn't want to go through all the IED infested place to go get them at night. And I was doing that, doing go, no go as a brigade commander for real, with really, truly professional folks at my side that kept me between the lines on that, my aviator and others out there. But the last thing I'd say is there's a guy named John Navalis, somebody you guys may know. He commanded an attack battalion for General Thurman in the brigade there. The first day of RIP, and General Thurman probably knows the day, it was around January 19th of that year of 2006. In my AO, one of his Apaches were shot down and the pilots were killed right in my AO. First day of RIP, when I had the con from the brigade in front of me. I used to remember those warrant officers' names. I feel, even though they weren't in my unit, but we had to go secure it. It was a big mess. And so survivability, even in that environment with those two, I think about those two a lot. And so I just bring that up there, bring that up today as we dive into some of these things to talk about. I finished the Army as the G8. I think that's why I'm on the panel here to talk about some of the integration challenges. I see Don back there, a former G8 cohort. So with that, I'll wrap it up and I look forward to the panel today.
Well, thank you, Jim, for that. And it does point us to why we're here today, what you brought up about your tough day in 2006. So opening question, we'll go to General McCurry. Today we've heard a lot about the Chief of Staff's initiatives to transform and contact, do a deliberate transformation, and then the concept-driven transformation. But Futures Command has also something it calls the 5 challenges. I'd ask you to talk about those Futures Command 5 challenges and how does the aviation portfolio help solve those? Will help solve those challenges.
Thanks, sir. I think, you know, General Rainey's done a really good job of laying out a path ahead for us at AFC. And the 5 challenges are really how do you address transformation over time and across all warfighting functions simultaneously, given the conditions I described in my opening remarks? And so the first thing is, how do we, we must employ a formation-based approach to lethality and survivability. So you heard a little bit of that from General Francis and General Pasquarette. Having more than one dilemma face the enemy is a good way to increase survivability of everything. And a great mentor, General Perkins, said to me when we were having a discussion about survivability one time, he said, hey, don't think about one piece of kit surviving against one munition. Think about how the total force survives when it's operating together. And then he alluded to his time in combat, that he felt like the formation was more survivable when Army aviation was in the air. And so I think that's a good lead into how Army aviation fits in formation-based approach. The other thing I would say about formation-based is we don't field a piece of equipment and fight a single piece of equipment. We build formation-based capabilities at echelon, and that's something different than a lot of forces around the world do in how we fight. So that's the formation-based. The second challenge is increased lethality and survivability of light formations. If you look at the force design update that General Francis and I worked on when he was the branch chief and I was the director in the building, a lot of that was to release trapped lift capability, red mobility, out of heavy formations and reinsert it into light divisions. The faster we can mass forces and the faster we can disaggregate those forces on the battlefield, the more we increase the survivability of those light formations. The third one is a tough one, and it's a really tough one for us. It's a challenge we probably ought to accept today. And I know they're doing some work on it at the center already with Rick Stockhausen in the lab, but how do we decrease the weight and sustainment of heavy formations? So I would say, ballistically, Army aviation is probably not a heavy formation. Sustainment tail, aviation is definitely a heavy formation. So how do we reduce that tail? And I know Lori and her team are doing some things in that realm at AMCOM too, with additive manufacturing and things. So that's the third challenge. Fourth one is integrate humans and machines. And this is, what do humans do best and what do machines do best, and how do we leverage that? So the first goal, is to protect those humans with the machines that we have. And the branch chief did a great job describing that earlier. Last is fielding this data-centric C2 system for decision dominance. And I'd ask you to focus on those last two words, decision dominance, and how do we turn faster than everybody else. Aviation has key roles in each one of those. I tried to describe them. And I would call, lastly, General Baker described aerial tier network extension earlier. That's a great aviation contribution in the future to extending the network, extending C2 across complex terrain and extended distances. Thanks.
Thank you. General Francis, next one to go to you. We've heard a lot today, like from the PEO about General Phillips about transforming and contact from his perspective. But how about from a TRADOC perspective? How does Army aviation, as it modernizes, as it transforms, how does it need to balance the requirement to fight tonight with the requirement to modernize for the future fight?
Okay, hey, thanks. So, interestingly, just yesterday, I sat down with the Army G3, the FCC director, General Hodney, the CAT commander, General Beagle, and we were talking about this very subject: is how do you maintain the ability to fight tonight while transforming for the future? And I'll just talk about this through a .mil PF lens overlaid on the transformation windows that AFC is talking about. So you have transformation contact. That's what can we get done right now, field to the force, and implement it immediately. That requires a different speed of .mil PF than we're probably used to. And what I would tell you is that what General Brito's doing is institutional transformation and contact. How do we make that go faster? How do we change the training base faster? McCurry was responsible for a rapid change in how we train UAS operators in a very, very short time out at Fort Huachuca as an example of that transformation, that institutional transformation. the transformation that has to happen across the .mil-PF is all of our Army systems as well. And so when you're doing that close fight thing, we have to be adaptive and be able to go faster than our systems have traditionally allowed us to go. Deliberate transformation, but that's between transformation and contact and conceptual transformation is really where the heavy .mil-PF work happens. But even those things happen at different speeds. It depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about facilities, that's like a 10-year look. If you've got to look at a facility type of issue, if it's a piece of kit or training, you can probably go a little bit faster. So as for example, as we bring FLAR on, the concept of how the Army is going to bring that into the formation, train it, and deliver it to units is all part of that process that began probably 2 or 3 branch chiefs ago and is still in formation today. And Claire Gill will have to bring that home on his watch as we figure out how we integrate that capability into our Army to build the formations that Mac was talking about. So I think it's a nuanced answer, right, to how we do transformation and contact while we're looking at the deep fight. And we can do it all. We can do more than one thing at a time, and we can do those things at different speeds. The challenge becomes when you're looking at how our facilities are funded versus how our equipment and our people are managed, integrating all of those Army systems and getting them to the point that we're ready to field a full capability and a full formation it will continue to be a challenge, right? And we want to go faster on things and field things as quickly as possible. But there are systems that, quite frankly, I think the Army needs to update to meet the chief's need for speed and the demand that is out there with the combatant commands today.
Thank you. Timely question. General Pasquarette, Jim, we had a lot of discussion today from the point of view of the COEs and AFC now about transforming, but you have a lot of experience about .lim-PF when it gets into the building from your former G8. So how do all these good ideas, how do they survive the knife fight that happens with the budget each year from your point of view? Yeah,
thanks, Pat. Just by chance, I was with Carl Gingrich this morning. I asked to see him on something, and I mentioned I was he's the current G8. I was the PA&E when I was the G8 a few years ago now. But and I mentioned, hey, they're probably going to ask me this question: how's .mil-PF going for you? And it sounded very much like how I experienced still, that there's a lot of work still to be done. And what Carl brought up and what reinforced what I was going to say is we start getting serious about it way too close in. And so when you think a MILCOM project takes 7 years, and then we start asking, hey, where are we going to park this thing? I'll just say a thing, whatever it is. Can our current facilities accommodate it or not? Usually the answer is no, but it's way inside of just that window. So really it's about advanced planning. I would call this something we work in industry, advanced planning, and we're not the best at that sometimes either. But that is really the problem. Some to tease us out, I think inside the building, it's an industrial age process in the information age that we can't seem to break through that. I'm going to pick at some scabs here to hopefully help in the long run. From my personal experience, and I watched this, I was part of the problem once upon a time, but I think it's still there, and we can do better as an Army. You eventually get there, but it's incredibly inefficient, and and too many times it's after time of need. It sounds like some of the stuff that Dave and Mac are talking about here is starting to get after it. And I know Pat Matlock and Carl co-chair a sync board that tries to work .mil-PF in the building. But I think they're probably like when I was the GA, it'd be a bunch of bubble charts. Okay, .mil-PF for this program, and they would be different colors, and we deep dive the red ones. And what happens, and this is inside the building language, it's very often cross-peg. And so anything that was inside the peg, I made sure that was synchronized if it was a material issue. But then when it gets pushed out to other parts of the other pegs to fund that in time of need, then when it needs to be fielded or developed or in the force, that tends to compete with other priorities inside of that peg. And what happens in times where the budgets are tough, it doesn't compete well because it gets jammed in and they have their own priorities. And unless it is micromanaged and there's guidance from the very top, from the secretary in chief. And then I think personally to get this, and Lori was in PA&E, looking at Lori Robinson, she was there when I was the G8. If it's not codified in something called the Army Program Guidance Memorandum, that you will fund this, and you can't be everything, but select programs that are very important to the Army's future in critical capabilities, that it will, .mil-PF will be funded across the pegs. And then when that comes in, that APAGM is what it's called, is the report card for all the pegs. And that can be a way mechanically, I think, to drive actions to make sure things like FLRAA, which is still probably far enough out to get it right. If it's not shown in, I think, codified in a document that holds the pegs to account for what they need to produce and fund, more importantly, for .mil-PF requirements, then we might be having this same conversation when FLRAA is getting fielded here in FY whatever.
If I can ask Mac, General McCurry, a follow-up question on that. Do you think the process we have with the CFTs and working with the COEs is addressing that .mil-PF issue that General Pasquarette brought up about it not being done in a timely manner, and it gets done in the building at the last minute? Is that still the case, or have you fixed that in either in the CFTs or with the COEs in TRADOC?
Yeah, I think I think that problem was independent of CFTs. We just added the CFTs in to make it interesting. You know, we had that problem before CFTs existed. The CFTs moved very quickly in the M, so the integration between a cross-functional team, a CDID, and a COE to do all of that is something that has to be intensively managed. Honestly, I think the six-pack does a pretty good job. I think, you know, General Phillips, General Baker stay really closely aligned on that, along with, you know, the CDID with Colonel Rudy Sanchez down there at Fort Novosel under General Gill and pulling all that together. I think that at AFC, we have now we have a directorate of integration now, and the goal of the directorate of integration is not to do what TRADOC does or do the level 3 integration in the building, but is to look earlier during the requirement process about these other implications. So we're thinking about them earlier before we get there. So I think that's one way that we're working at AFC to kind of help with that gap.
That's very good to hear. Thank you. I'll go to General Francis. We have now a deep sensing CFT, but you know how will deep sensing advances impact and how you integrate Army Aviation with new ISR capabilities and reconnaissance capabilities like General Thurman was talking about at great depth earlier today to fill the Army's #1 gap for Army Aviation, which is reconnaissance?
Well, that's a great question. And I think the Vice actually described part of the answer to this in his scope, right? He said how we think about deep, close, and in the rear area is different just simply based on ranges, you know, where we have capabilities that can shoot 2,000 kilometers today. In order to do that, you have to have a sensing capability that's that deep. And there are multi-layers of that sensing capability that are either on hand or being developed as we speak. But that'll be fundamentally critical to Army Aviation as it conducts that reconnaissance. Remember, and I think it was General Thurman that said difference between surveillance and reconnaissance, and that's where we marry the two. I think Army Aviation in support of shaping operations or a close operation in a division fight or a core fight, that will be very critical to that. But that deep sensing capability is what allows us to set conditions for Army Aviation to be employed as part of the Combined Arms team.
So a question for General Francis and General McCurry. We talked about this a little bit in some of the other panels today, but I think maybe you can go into a little greater detail. So I do know that General Rainey has put out guidance like everything that can be shot from a helicopter needs to be shot from the ground, from a ground vehicle or from a soldier. And so all that stuff in the air is going to complicate, control of the air. So does the Army have the governance it needs in place to execute the Doctrine PF to integrate a bunch of cross-cutting type of programs that we're talking about in developing for the future force?
Mac, I'll start and then you can take it from the AFC perspective. So I would say that we're working on that. We don't have the right answer yet. And what I would tell you is that we've known that airspace control was going to be a major issue years ago as we started thinking about the proliferation of UAS, all the things flying in the air at the same time, and our ability to do dynamic airspace control as opposed to the static method that we've used in the past, where at an NTC rotation, for instance, it would take us 30 minutes to clear a call for fire because we had to get something out of the way in order to shoot artillery, for instance. And so we must be faster than that. We must be more dynamic than that. And in order to do that, we have to be able to take inputs from multiple systems that can, on the fly, tell us when there's an airspace hazard in front of us, help us redirect around that threat, be it an artillery position area, a UAS, or something else that's flying through the air. But airspace control is a significant issue that we continue to work across the .mil-PF, and it's something that we're going to have to continue to focus on here in the future. The airspace is getting more crowded by the day, and not just with our stuff, but with other people's stuff as well. So it's certainly a challenge that we've taken on, and one that we have to continue to develop. Any thoughts, Mac?
Let me talk about this airspace one a little bit first, and then I'll talk governance of requirements. I think in the past, if you think about it, and I don't know how many artillerymen are in the room, but we carved out chunks of airspace for different things. We drew big corridors, and we had walls in space, and you didn't cross lines, and that's airspace deconfliction. When you think about where we're going with the Air-Ground-Littoral, you've got to be able to use the airspace for multiple things at the same time. And there's some doctrinal adjustments that are coming out that the center's involved in with Mission Command Center of Excellence and CAC. And then there's also some technology available out there that will assist us. But it's got to kind of be an all hands on deck approach to this to be able to, it's not about just the Black Hawk flying through the air. This is about defensive fires shooting up through that airspace. This is about offensive surface-to-surface fires, being able to prosecute targets, and then the myriad of unmanned systems that are out there and how we're leveraging those. And we're not at the point where we're going to be able to just carve out big chunks of airspace and say, you stay over there and you stay here. Let me pivot a little bit to governance of requirements. So about 3 years ago, AFC and CAC saw this meeting engagement coming on unmanned requirements. And General Francis was the branch chief still at the time, and we pulled together a GOSC. And every COE and every CFT and every CDID had a seat at the table. And we said, what are your requirements in the unmanned space? And everybody threw them out there. And at that time, we would have had a large spike in new programs of record, all based on doing a specific function that we would not have been able to achieve under the current budget or structure of the Army. And so we began to align those efforts and to have more than one system do more than one function. Each system could do multiple functions. So that GOSC still exists, and the CFT has done a good job in the last year of expanding that to include launched effects. There's a governance structure that starts with the COEs, CFTs, and CDIDs, and then it goes up to the 3-star level with TRADOC, AFC, and RICTO all involved to have the right experts in the room for those discussions, and then it proceeds to the 4-star level for TRADOC and AFC and on into the building. So that governance structure is set. I think that's a good model to look at on cross-cutting capabilities that might be treading outside of a specific force mod proponent's lane in the future. Over.
General Pasquarette, do you have a comment for the industry?
Yeah, a couple of things from my perspective, I guess. We're in the process of making, I'm sure Frank Muth's here from Textron, maybe they're working on too, I'm guessing, but we're developing platforms that are going to have integrated switchblades. It's going to have integrated, set out an ISR platform that can go forward, launched effects. Okay, if you want to use it, that's on the platform at the fingertips of a staff sergeant, vehicle commander. We're creating a robot that has a 30-pack of switchblades on it. That is like a machine gun of switchblades. Once you push, it highlights the need to solve this problem. I think it's really in this platform here, this vehicle, it's like Pat told me, I guess the ICD for JADC2 just got approved. That's been a long journey. But the vehicle on the front edge of with high compute on it is a microcosm or a micro JADC2 that's going to be linking sensors and shooters and being able to make speed of light decisions based on AI-enabled, algorithm-informed sensor to shooter links. So if you jump forward, in order to leverage that capability, it's all about this airspace control. And it can't be the RAS approval or something that we, when I grew up and call me, I'll take a nap, call me when it gets approved. But I think there is, I think, a technical answer on this though. We have to be able to and I think we can get there. Anything that flies is sensed and then it's networked and linked automatically and autonomously deconflicted once it gets in the air. I see this. I can see the vision of this happening in the future. There's obviously a cyber concern to that. We're going to have to work through it. But until we get to that point, we won't be able to leverage the capability on the ground that we think we need in order to extend the range of lethality and effectiveness of combat vehicles on the ground. That's going to go much beyond the weapon system on the vehicle. The last thing I say is where I see something that opened my eyes as a G8. I went out to Fort Sill at this thing where they are demonstrating different domain here, but some applicability about how to maybe think about this. They put me in the back of a Stryker to use it was a 10 kilowatt laser, and I shot down a drone at about a mile away or so. Had a couple of young soldiers with a PlayStation controller in there, and they told me aim at one of the quads, and it melted it and shot it down. But how this worked is they knew where the satellites were in space. At least the satellites we were worried about. And then if you were shooting at that drone and one of our satellites we were worried about, because this goes into infinity, these lasers, it wouldn't let you shoot until it was in the green spot where we didn't care what it hit beyond that. And that's a way, if we can figure out how to be able to get something in the air right away before it can be sensed, it's not going to hit something we're worried about, and then it can get deconflicted right away. That is a desired characteristic, I think, out there that we have to have between the air and the ground to realize the capability that's out there.
I can't help but listen to the complexity of what you described, and you haven't mentioned the enemy filling the space also with stuff coming at us. So it's a very complicated problem, far more complex than anything we saw. You're living it now, but anything more complex than the air superiority we had in Iraq and Afghanistan, which we're only things flying up there. So, and Jim, you mentioned that this is all enabled by the network, and we talked about that earlier today about the next generation C2 being so important, and it's data layers and transport layers and all that. But the center of gravity for being able to fight tonight and transforming a stride is the network. And General Cody, you have a point you want to make on that?
Thank you. Hello. This dilemma we have of transforming in stride, and this is for our industry partners just as well as being able to fight tonight. I firmly believe in, when you're old, you can say stuff and you don't care whether it hits the Washington Post or not because no one will read it. We're going to be at war in the next 6-7 months, whether we like it or not. We may be tired of fighting in the Middle East, but they're not tired of fighting us. And so I go back to the 4th ID with the 21st Division, and we're fielding FBCB2, ASAS, AFATADs, all kinds of great stuff. And right next to us to fight tonight was the 1st Cab Division. And then all of a sudden we end up being the 3, and we're going to Iraq in 2003. We had MSC, we had a digitized 4th Infantry Division, and then we had a Blue Force tracking, quickly fielded rest of the force. Only 3 messages, and people, great smart kids, warrant officers and Signal and everything else came out with Merc Chat and all kinds of other stuff. And we fielded CPOF and other things. And we got rid of MSC and we put JNN nodes in so that everybody could get the live motion video. But it was all hobbled together. And from Project Convergence, the 2 that I was a mentor on, I walked away saying, if you're going to transform in stride, but still have the capability of fighting at night, you better get the tactical, technical, and operational architecture right for JADC2. Then industry can, as you did after 9/11, you can surge and all that stuff will talk to each other. And you can start adding on. But the way we're fielding now today, because of budgets, as Jim talked about, and the different pegs competing and everything else, you end up with brigades in a division with comm packages that don't talk to the other brigades. And aviation, unfortunately, is always the last one to get the upgrades on communications. Yet if you're on the ground, that's the person you want to talk to when you're in a firefight. So I would assert to you, Chief of Staff of AFC, that is really the center of gravity. We've got to get the CFT network right. And then all this other stuff that the CFTs are doing, that gives you that Dotlam PF piece so we can do the fielding in stride when we have to go to war. Because right now, if we had to go in 2 weeks, all this fancy stuff, we'll do the same cobbling we did in 03 and 04. So I just toss that out to you. The last thing I will say is there's a lot of lessons to be learned from music. The UAS study that we did out in the desert about 5-6 years ago. And as we look at future tactical UASs, we've got to have one universal controller. It doesn't make any difference. And industry can give you that. You know, if you're going to start putting a whole bunch of UASs out there, wouldn't it be nice if you had the same controller for each one of them? We can do it on our iPhones. I can send a message to a Samsung. We've got that. And that gets back to MOSA and getting that right. To me, those industry and our CFTs and our PMs and stuff, when we have to go to war and we start issuing new kit, they'll get it to us. The question is, will it talk to each other? So that's my 5 cents.
Thank you, sir. And I think we all lived that, what you described in 2003, and is truly cobbled together. General Thurman knows that very well from his CFLIC G3 time. So I've gotten several questions I'll throw out to the panel about lessons learned, in particular from Ukraine. And I think we need to have maybe a quick discussion on whether there have been any lessons learned from Ukraine yet. And then how have they factored into the decisions that have been made? Like, did they factor a request? Was that a factor, the FAR decision, for instance? And is it driving how the Army's moving towards fixing it or filling its reconnaissance gap? Any comments from the panel?
I'll start, then pass it to you guys very quickly. So the Army absolutely has been studying Ukraine since really before it even started, in all areas, everything from cyber to information operations to the proliferation of UAS, the innovation that's been going on in that space by folks that don't have the defense industrial complex that the United States has, and figuring out how to get it done. So we absolutely have been studying that. The one caution I would put out there is that we can also learn wrong lessons if we aren't looking at it the same way. For instance, there was a time when there were folks saying, "Oh, aviation is not survivable in this kind of context." Well, not the way the Russians were employing aviation, flying in daytime, high altitude, same routes in and out. Nothing compared to what Army aviation is trained and equipped to do. And so we don't want to learn the wrong lessons from when we study Ukraine. There are certainly lots of valuable lessons. And I will tell you, the Chief of Staff of the Army is very, very focused on making sure that we are gleaning those lessons and transforming in contact to transform ourselves as rapidly as possible, because they're transforming as rapidly as they can in the middle of that fight. So we just don't want to learn the wrong lessons in that.
First thing I'd say on lessons learned is you haven't learned it till you've changed something and institutionalized it. And that's what my boss, General Rainey, would say if he was sitting here. And so I hesitate to say lessons learned at this point. I would still call most of them observations. And I would agree with General Francis that the observations have changed over time. We frequently refer to General Starry and the 1973 war. Well, when General Starry went over there and walked the battlefields, that we knew what the outcome had been, and we don't know the outcome yet. So I think that's one distinction. That being said, there's a lot of things emerging on the battlefield that we have to pay attention to. So observations and implications is where I would characterize those right now. A note of caution is that, neither side is man trained or equipped like us or fights like us, as General Francis pointed out. But the UAS has certainly had an impact over there. In some regards, it's like the pit mortar of World War I. It's caused this frozen middle where it's very difficult to maneuver. We have seen both sides do rapid learning now. So that should have implications for us on how fast we have to turn capabilities, not in years, not in months, in weeks, be able to adapt. And that points out the importance of MOSA. I think what also is important is to have a realization about what's changing in warfare and what's not changing in warfare. Warfare still going to be bloody. It's still a human endeavor, an endeavor on will. The will of the Ukrainian people has certainly been evident. What's not changing, is also, or what's changing is also important. New technologies creating this frozen middle and the pace of change. So what we're trying to do at AFC, while we're taking all of these observations and implications, is rapidly turn them into things like edge and project convergence, where we can take those observations and implications, take the technology that all of our great industry partners make available to us, and begin to validate or invalidate some of those assumptions, so we can get to some of those lessons learned.
Just from my perspective, great comments by Dave and Mac. I'm out of the loop when you get out of the uniform to be to see behind the wire and a lot of the lessons learned that I'm sure folks in uniform here are. From my perspective on lessons learned in the industry side, we try and get out in front. We're very tuned into it. There are Abrams and Strykers and something called the ACSV sitting in the hands of the Ukrainian army right now. Some of those in Russia, by the way, right now. And when there's a media report of an Abrams that's been destroyed or a Stryker, that we feel that. My leadership, everybody gets on their heels. Like, what did we do wrong? What can we do better? And so when there are lessons learned that comes down through the Army that are codified, this is where we need an answer for. We take that to heart. We're working APS, active protective systems. It's a vulnerability for ground combat vehicles right now. They're really for something coming at you from the side, is how they develop. Well, now we got this top attack threat that's been exposed on the YouTube videos. It's been coming for years now. We've seen it in action. And so we're working hard because industry can go fast when there's a desire for something and there's money to align with it. So that's just one example of what we've seen and what we're trying to do to react to that. And there's some low tech and high tech solutions to that. But it's been interesting to kind of talk my boss off the wall when we see a report of one of our vehicles not doing well. I'll go back to what Dave said, I think, right up front. And I say, listen, who really knows what's going on? This is media reports, but what I've seen on YouTube videos, it's not combined arms. And the training and how we would fight with NATO at our side is much different than what we're seeing there that puts those soldiers at risk, that has the outcomes you're seeing. So that's kind of the patent answer. It's easy to say, and I don't know if it allays their concerns, but I know that's the right response.
Can I have a follow-up with General McCurry? Can you use this as an example of how a formation-based solution could solve the problem rather than the tank problem, for instance? Trying to add an top attack capability to the tank itself. Can you explain how General Rainey's approaches would solve this problem differently?
I don't know if I can solve it. We would certainly look at other ways to do it and address it. I think, this is where we can look at, well, let's say, okay, top attack coming down. Those are unmanned systems or loitering munition. One man's loitering munition is another person's launched effect is another person's small UAS. So it's kind of the same family of systems. So how do you get after that? Everybody's got to be able to do counter UAS. So this kind of points to the opportunity available. We've talked a lot about the vulnerabilities in the air-ground-littoral, but there's huge opportunity in the air-ground-littoral, where opportunities for Army aviation with the proper integration of manned, unmanned, and counter UAS capabilities to continue to dominate that space. And so I think looking at how else you would take those munitions out is one thing. In my mind, counter UAS and protection are every soldier's responsibility, not the armor formation, not the ADA formation. It's everybody. I know at the center we recently hosted a counter UAS aviation summit to get after what we can do from the air to those UAS in this space. So that's a way I think by pulling the combined arms team together that you could address some of these threats.
Good answers from all the panel. Thank you for that. I'm going to change direction a little bit and go and talk about AI and machine learning. How do you see the Army aviation community integrating AI machine learning, both its manned platforms and its unmanned platforms? Where do you see that headed?
Well, let me start with just a little bit of history. We've been doing kind of man-unmanned teaming for a long time in various capacities over the years. That really took off really in Desert Storm, Desert Shield, where we really started to match sensor to shooter a little bit better and help us to do that. And it's really taken off from there. So I would argue, that we've been doing this, we have been developing this for a long time. With the rapid acceleration of technology, it really provides us an opportunity to make aviation even more lethal and more effective in a fight, because what we're going to be able to do is reduce the complexity inside the cockpit so that the decision makers can focus on the complexity outside the cockpit. And so that as we talk about partially manned aircraft and things of that nature, autonomy is here, and it gives us the capability to use at the time and place of the commander's choosing, and protect the force and limit the risk to the force, and only employ those man capabilities as required. As General Thurman said, when we're doing things that require human beings in the loop, we're fighting that fight that is inherently human. But we don't need to make first contact with those things. So I think we're well on the way of continuing the use of AI and autonomy in Army aviation.
I would say artificial intelligence, machine learning along a spectrum or a path towards autonomy. So you've heard General Rainey say many times, we're not going to make contact with humans first. We're not going to trade blood for contact. We're going to use our unmanned systems. So to carry that corollary a little bit further with AI and ML in the cockpit, the first task is to protect the crews. How do you protect the crews? How can you offload tasks that crews are saturated with today? That young W-2 sitting in the front seat of an AH-64 in this high threat environment, close to the terrain with his fire control radar. Where can you implement some AI ML in there to offload some tasks from them? Further down the path to autonomy, can you get to a space where you shrink the crews available or the crews required on a mission? So if you look at the combination of 360-degree sensors, rapid processing. You now have visibility. Could you go from 4 crew members to 2 crew members in a Black Hawk at a certain point on this autonomous scale? Could you go from 2 to 1 in a, we had a question earlier about, some sort of loyal wingman configuration. Can you go to 1 crew member in an Apache when you offload some of these crews? And then can you get to, for the current manned platforms, can you get to what I call optimally manned? Some would say optionally manned. I like optimally manned because I take MET-TC into consideration. I envision on a LSCO battlefield where I have Chinooks significantly standing off from the threat. Could I do sustainment without crews, taking advantage of the duration of those frames? But if I needed to put Rangers on the objective with those same platforms, now I can man them. That's how I would talk about that. When we talk about airspace was the big challenge. I think there's huge opportunity here with some of our AIML tools to get after some of the things General Pasquarette was talking about. And then just with the behaviors in our launched effects is kind of the next leap there in our unmanned systems and how we use AIML there. I think that's really addressing each part of the spectrum. Over.
I would just quickly follow, and it's a broader than aviation, but I think it was toward the end. I brought, it was, I think, me and the chief, McConville at the time, when we were just BS in his office one day, and I could see this emerging where this technology was taking us, and it's in the most fantastical case, it's the age of the machines from the Terminator. And I'm a little facetious here, but and my point is there's some law of land warfare issues, there's some ethical issues that I think, again, this is broader. I'm sorry for this platform or this panel here, but I don't think China will have this man in the loop concern. And so when you get the man in the loop, which I think is our values as a country, we'll always want to have that. But I think China will say, hey, the algorithms are good enough. They're refined where they're going to see something and it meets the criteria. The machine will cut it loose at the speed of light once it's confirmed. And so that is something I think as an army, as a nation, moving forward, that we have to grapple with before we're faced with it. And I'll just leave it at that.
The man in the loop, maybe when he decides to launch the weapon, it's because it's already out. Ukraine's already using algorithms to have autonomous drones, so that's already here. So I'm glad you brought that up, though, Jim. Thank you. I got a question from a mechanical engineering professor from West Point who's in the audience, and so
I'm a history major.
Yeah, no chills went up anybody's spine on this table, I don't think. But what do cadets and young Army officers and soldiers, what kind of skills they need to bring to the Army to be able to fight, contribute to the aviation fight that we're talking about?
First, yeah. So that's a great question, and I would tell you that we do leader development better than any Army in the world. Is it perfect? No. But what we do in the Army is we touch an officer, an NCO, a soldier, all the way at various points throughout their career, and focus on that leader development opportunity that we have, and that TRADOC delivers in many cases. But quite frankly, that's just a portion of it, right? It's really the operational force that does that professional development in earnest, because 80% of a soldier's career will be spent in the operational force, and that's where the majority of that happens. So the skill sets that we talk about, and we have categorized by MOS. Here are the skills, knowledge, and attributes that we want an officer in aviation or in any other branch of the service to have. But what I would tell you is that there's some fundamental things that we want folks to be, and that is a leader of character that is technically and tactically proficient in the task at hand. And I was jokingly said, but it's true. I am a history major, and I'm an Army aviator. So it doesn't necessarily matter what your major is unless you're in a specialty like medicine or something like that. But it's about those attributes that we want in our officers, our NCOs, and our soldiers that enable us to do what we do in Army aviation. And so as we look to the fights of the future, there will be challenges that you have to face that nobody sitting in this room had to face. And we need agile thinkers. We need adaptive leaders that are capable of employing the force in a way that is required at the time of need. And so being proficient and technically, tactically competent allows you to build the experience and the intuition to know how to do that in the future. So that's really kind of what I believe that we're looking for in our young leaders. But great question, and keep up the fight.
I was a Portuguese concentrator, so me have a question here. I'll start with General Pasquarette first, and then ask you two serving generals to answer it as well. But let's start with Jim. And the question is, we're talking about how we have to do things faster, and we have to get benefits out of the experiments, and we have to do rapid prototyping and learn from them, and just field capabilities to the soldiers quicker. Do we have the right relationship between industry and the Army to do this, or are we on a path that it's going to serve us to meet this need? Jim, I'll start with you.
Yeah, quick thoughts, and then my two friends up here will have some thoughts that are still in uniform. I think from the industry perspective, and probably Tony Crutchfield and some of my other friends out there in coat and tie may have to think of like this. I think there's engaging the Army. I'm talking for like folks in the Army today. With industry, I think it needs to be early, frequent, and transparent. The early is once you have a concept that's emerging and you think there's something to it, don't hide it, at least share it through whatever you can. We have our own IRAD dollars. Now for us, it's about 70 million a year at General Dynamics Land Systems. And when I was at G8, that was nothing. But I will tell you, we are very efficient and effective with those dollars that we spend. And if we can hear early on that this is a direction you're thinking about going based on a requirement you foresee, we will invest on that early if we get the indicators you're serious about it. Then frequent, it has to be, there's a tendency to avoid a lot of interactions. It's kind of like maybe with the media sometime with folks in uniform, it's a necessary evil or something, talking to industry or talking to the media. But I think as frequently as you can, engaging in industry through different forums, different means, in order to share your problems, your challenges, where you need some help. We are all ears on that, and we'll dive into it. And then the toughest part sometimes is to be as transparent as you can. Everybody that we know you can't cross a line, but sometimes you stay right in the center groove, and that's not very helpful. I'd ask you to get closer to that line you can't cross. And share what you can, so that again we can go. Sometimes we have to go to it's about our investors on our side, our stockholders. We've got to make bets, and we have to know that the Army is shared with us all they can, so that we can make sure that we are putting our effort, our dollars into where we think they want to go, and what they need from us in return. So I write early, frequent, and transparent interactions with industry would be what I would put on the table.
Jim, I like to use the example that when you were wearing a uniform, I came to you and talked to you about the Army's long-range fire study, which nobody in the industry had seen. And you agreed that we should see it, and you brought in a rep from all of industry and gave us the brief. So it was very helpful.
Yeah, I remember that. And that major from track, in secret, we got everybody's clearance, and he laid the whole thing out. And it was PRISM, it was all these things that are getting fielded today is what we were talking about. So, yeah.
Gentlemen?
So I would say that I think, having been around many of you over the years, I think we have a phenomenal relationship with industry. But to your point, Jim, the ability to go closer to the edge is a point well taken. I think that Army Aviation has done that well over the years. I know with me and with Mac and with Claire Gill, we do industry days down at Fort Novacell. We bring in and we give you a classified brief, much like you just talked about, to show you where we're going, because we want to get you as close to that answer as we possibly can, so that you're investing those IRAD dollars and other things, and things that we want, things that we're going to buy, things that we need for the force. So I agree with you 100%. And I think that Army Aviation has done that pretty darn well over the years.
At AFC, we'll talk to everybody. So my door's open. You guys can find me. You know me. You can contact me, and we'll get the DOI, the Director of Integration, as the outward-facing industry interfacing piece of AFC involved first, and then work things up. But we'll talk to everybody.
Joe Cody, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I agree with everything Jim said. This is from my Army buddies and from somewhat experience. Okay. We tend to prescribe too early to industry. What we need to do is describe what it is the dilemma we're trying to solve. And then they'll go out and use their IRAD money the best way possible. But too often I've seen this where we prescribe early of what we want because we think either AFC or the PEOs or whatever, the commandants, they come up with, hey, this is what we need. Describe it to them because they got some smart people. SOF does this better than anybody. You go in and they'll tell you their dilemma with their fighters and stuff, and then the engineers and stuff will say, okay, and they'll come back with it. That's how you got white phosphorus goggles, for instance, and the new set of goggles where you can see around corners and stuff. But that came from SOF because they didn't prescribe to industry. They told them what their problem was. And if you prescribe, you're going to get threshold capability. You'll never get objective. That's what I've learned over 40 plus years.
I would like to thank the panel. I thought the discussion today was very good, and I learned a lot. And so always a pleasure being with you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.